Hello and welcome to the OKPreps Extra Show. I'm Patrick Prince, joined as always by Barry Lewis. Barry, before we get into the action on the football field, let's talk about Photo Day, which was yesterday. How'd it go?
Went great. It was great. We want to thank, first of all, Union High School and athletic director Emily Barkley for allowing us to have the event there and hosting the event. They've done that for about 10 years, and we really appreciate it. And we thank them so much for hosting the event. It's really a great facility, the UMAC, for us to host that event. We had 300 people turn out, 300 athletes and coaches turn out, and got a lot of information, took a lot of photos, and you'll be seeing that coverage or the information and the photos that we gathered there throughout the school year. And for the first time, we had flag football teams attend, which was really cool. We
Very
had two
cool.
flag football teams attend. We were hoping some would attend, and Bishop Kelly's and McLean's did attend. So we were glad to see them, as well as the traditional winter sports of basketball, wrestling, and swimming. So it was a fun event as always, and we appreciate everyone who attended. And again, thanks to Union High School and Emily Barkley for hosting.
Yeah, such a tremendous help in our coverage. So well said. Appreciate Union. Appreciate all the kids and coaches who showed up. So let's talk about football, Bear. I can't get my mind around that we're in week 9 already. I don't how did that happen? It's just you wait all summer for football to start, and then in August you start to feel it, and then it goes by in an instant. So last 2 weeks of the regular season, which teams are these final 2 weeks maybe most important for? Like who are some of the teams you're looking at that need to do a couple things here in the final couple weeks?
One team that jumps out is Broken Arrow. Broken Arrow's had an up and down season, didn't coming off their worst season in a long time last year. There were some high hopes this year that they would at least have a winning record and it would be better. And I think things overall have been better. But in order for it to really be a better season for them, it's these last 2 weeks of the regular season are crucial, especially when they got into a bit of a hole a couple of weeks ago, losing to what had been a winless Norman North team that really was put Broken Arrow in a difficult spot. So they've got to make up for that in the next 2 weeks. They're 3-5, and right now they're in playoff position. But in order to ensure they get into the playoffs, they really need one more district win. Even in 6A, when 6 of the 8 teams in the district make the playoffs, and they did make the playoffs last year, even though they were only 3-7 in the regular season. But there is a scenario where they might not make the playoffs this year, which would be like seemingly unimaginable for a program of Broken Arrow's tradition to not make the playoffs when there's 6 out of 8 teams making it. But there is that possibility if they don't win another game.
Who
But
do
there
they?
is also the possibility if they win, if they can sweep the next two games, which are both possible, against Edmond Memorial and Westmore, that then they could host a first round game. So the stakes are really high. And if you win a first round game, I mean, if you host a first round game, win a first round game, then you assure yourselves of at least a 500 season, which I think would be significant for Broken Arrow as they try to rebuild the program. And there are also a lot of other interesting district races, Patrick, as far as what's important in the next 2 weeks, because technically no one's got anything really wrapped up right now with 2 weeks ago. There's certain districts where that it looks like a team's most assuredly going to clinch the district, but nothing mathematically has been decided really yet as far as district championships.
Well, to that point, Barry, 6A2 has some interesting things going on.
Yes, very interesting. That was the district where going into last week, you had 4 teams that were all 4-0, and then the 4 other teams, all 0-4 is the haves and have-nots district. So the benefit of that is all the haves are playing each other in the last 3 weeks, which makes for incredibly compelling football. And I think those being Muskogee, Putnam North, Sand Springs, and Sapulpa. And I think Muskogee, being the top ranked team, defending champion, is the favorite. I think the other three are really closely bunched. So I last week I saw Muskogee Sand Springs. Muskogee won by 16. I think Sand Springs has closed the gap between the programs from last year, but still Muskogee is the favorite. So this week you've got Sand Springs visiting Putnam North, and you've got Sapulpa visiting Muskogee. And next week you will have Sand Springs and Sapulpa in the Highway 97 rivalry, and then you'll have Muskogee and Putnam North playing. If Putnam North wins this week, then you probably got Muskogee and Putnam North going for all the marbles in a district championship game next week. Playoff positioning is up for grabs. I mean, I think it's really Sand Springs with the win against Putnam North. It looks like they would have the inside track to get a first round bye. So it's going to be a wild last 2 weeks in District 6A 2-2.
Well, and staying on that theme, Barry, some interesting things in 3A4 as well.
Yes, you've got, again, this is sort of like a smaller version of 6A 2-2, where you've got Berry Hill, Claremore Sequoia, and Cassia Hall all battling for the top 3 spots. And I think all 3 are pretty closely matched. Last week, Cassia beat Claremore Sequoia by 10. It's a pretty wild game. This week, you've got Berry Hill playing Claremore Sequoia, and then next week you'll have Berry Hill playing Cassia Hall. So that's all very interesting. I think those all have a chance to be really great games. And I think it's really so important in that district to be able to come away with the district title, or at least get second place, so you can be at home for the first round. So there's a lot at stake in those games. So that's a very fascinating race. And you got one in 4A3 as well, where you've got the way it looks like it's going to evolve is you've got Grove, Cushing, and Fort Gibson, all 3 good teams.
Mm-hmm.
Teams that I could see winning a playoff, at least all winning a playoff game or 2. Only 2 of those are going to make the playoffs. One of them is going to be the odd team out. So Cushing and Fort Gibson are playing this week. That's a huge game.
I mean, I've seen all those 3 teams play this season. That's kind of hard to imagine, Barry, that one of them's not going to make it.
I think because you've got Wagoner, of course, Wagoner being Wagoner. And then Miami is the team that has really been a surprise team in that district. So they're the team I don't think anyone was counting on, at least outside of Miami, to be as good as they are. But when they beat Grove, that was huge.
Yeah. What kind of impact does Alex-Shieldnight's season-ending ankle injury have on Wagoner?
Alex-Shieldnight, who ranks as second, or who has been second in our all-world rankings, haven't quite figured out where he'll be in this current week's all-world rankings yet. But that just tells you what type of player he is. Probably the best non-quarterback player that we've got in this area. So, and he's an impact player on both sides of the ball. Defensive end, I mean, everyone's known for several years he's a really good defensive end, but since really the middle last year, he's really emerged as a pretty dominant tight end, H-back type of player, and terrific blocker, pass catcher. And that is a huge loss for Wagoner. Wagoner obviously has a ton of talent. They may be able to overcome it, but when it hurts you when you lose a player of Alex-Shieldnight's capability, guy who's an OU commit. I mean, that should say enough right there. An OU commit, dominant 2-way player, definitely was a player of the year candidate. So that's going to be tough to overcome, but I think if anyone can do it, it'll be Wagoner, just because there still is a lot of talent left. But that will make the road to getting another gold ball a little tougher.
Wagner's still your 4A favorite, though, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Barry, there's great performances, every week in high school football, but we had a couple of really, really impressive ones this past week. Shaker-Reisig threw for more than 500 yards, 8 TDs. Peyton Campbell for Stillwater had 4 interceptions. You'd think after a couple of interceptions, they just quit throwing in his direction, but whatever. pj-Wallace had a very workmanlike 212 yards on 27 carries, and there were some others too. I just mentioned a few. Of all the great performances last week, which one stood out to you?
Well, I think as far as moving forward, I mean, they all stood out. Shaker and Peyton Campbell were players of the week, turned out to be players of the week. And amazingly, I didn't realize this. This was Shaker's first time. And despite he's had an incredible career, this is the first time he's been Tulsa World Player of the Week.
Really?
He's been nominated a lot. He's never won the voting. Didn't win the voting again this week, but he was a staff choice. But that sort of surprised me. It's about time he's Player of the Week. So anyway, pj-Wallace moving forward. Well, both pj-Wallace and Shaker was really important going forward because it may signal a trend. Because Shaker, for a lot of the games recently, Union had been relying mostly on its ground game. I think the week before, or there's a game maybe it was the week before, or 2 weeks before, where Shaker only threw 14 times and threw for 114 yards. The passing attack really hasn't been going like you would expect it to most of the season. And last week, I think was a return or was a signal. It made a statement what Union's passing attack can be, that they finally have recovered from everything that has gone on, the adversity that Jarek Wade's shooting and the loss of him that since after the season opener. I think now the passing game is really back on track, and Union can be a scary team to play if the passing game's on track, because the running game is really good. So they're going to be a very tough offense to stop. And then you've got pj-Wallace. He's rushed for over 1,000 yards this year, his first year with Muskogee. So he's having a really good year, but he's never really had to have a workload like he had last week. Until last week, his workload had been pretty light, which is good for Muskogee because he's fresh and ready to go for the stretch run when the games really count. And he seemed to welcome that load and fared really well with over 200 yards, because in order for Muskogee to defend its title successfully, they will need, in addition to Bird Ficklen's just great overall all-around play, they will need a strong ground game. And I mean, again, it's been strong all year, but to see pj-Wallace in a workload and a heavy workload situation, that was interesting. Because he's used to that. He had it all the time when he was at Bartlesville.
Right. Big game for Hale this week, Barry. They're hosting Collinsville. Tell us about what's going on with the Rangers.
Yes, this is Hale's biggest game in 14 or 15 years. This is the first time since at least 2010. I think really since 2009, just say 15 years. This is the first time that they're playing a game in week 9 that is meaningful as far as getting into the playoffs. Last time they were in the playoffs was in 2009. I think they've got 3 wins this year, 3-5. Last time they won 3 games was in 2010. And that third win that year came in the final game. So this is a huge step forward for Hale. And so even though I think they're going to be a big underdog to Collinsville on Friday night, just the fact that they are playing a meaningful game for the first time in 15 years as far as getting into the playoffs, playing a meaningful game in week 9, I think that's a huge step forward for Hale. I had a chance to see them last week. I watched them play at Rogers. Very impressed. And I think it's going to be a tall order to beat Collinsville, which they'll have to do to get into the playoffs. Right now, there's a 3-way tie for the 4th and final playoff spot in 5A4 with Collinsville and Tahlequah. But Hale's right there. So if they are able to pull off the win, then all of a sudden the playoffs are possible. But Collinsville's coming off a couple of 1-point losses, and I know they never imagined coming into the year where they would be struggling to have a playoff berth wrapped up at this point. I think Collinsville's still going to make the playoffs, but just the fact that we're talking about a meaningful game for Hale in week 9, I think that is huge progress.
Well, you and I are both TPS graduates, so I know we like seeing the TPS schools doing well and playing meaningful games. So that's really cool. What else is going on, Barry? Anything else we should share with the folks before we get out of here?
Um, we've got in Friday's Tulsa World, we've got Bill Haston will continue his series with giving us an inside look at Booker T's outstanding defensive lineman, Joseph Graves, who's already been offered by OU, as well as some also attracting interest from other Power 4 schools. So if you've been following that series, I know you'll want to pick up a copy of Friday's Tulsa World or go online to OKPrepsExtra.com. And even if you haven't been following the series, you can catch up really quick. And, even as a standalone, it's going to be great to read, to learn more about Booker T. Washington's outstanding sophomore, Joseph Graves.
The previous installment that Bill wrote on Joseph Graves was one of my favorite ones that we've done of this series. If you haven't read it, go online, go check it out, go dig it out of the archives. It was on basically a family dinner. Bill Haston and our photographer Daniel Schuler attended a family dinner, and it was it was a really good installment. Bill wrote it really, really well. So I don't know what he's writing on Friday. So looking forward myself to seeing what he comes up with. Do you know what the angle is, Barry, for
I
Friday?
don't know what the angle is,
Okay.
Patrick, but also encourage people to read Patrick's continuing diary that he is working with kale-charboneau on, the outstanding Wagoner quarterback and linebacker. A diary that Kale's been writing with Patrick's assistance all year long and giving us some great insight and behind the scenes look at what it's like to be a standout player on a standout team. So, Patrick, got any? What's this week's installment going to be on?
Well, it was kind of a rough one because we talked about the injury to Alex-Shieldnight. He's not only Alex, a key member of that team, but they're great friends. And to see your good friend who has this, this amazing potential in future, and I know you commit, like you mentioned, that's hard. That's hard to see that happen to your friend. And so we just talked about that and kind of what that means to see that happen to a good friend, but also what does it mean for the team going forward? And he kind of summed it up like this. He just said, all of our goals are still intact. It's just going to be a little bit harder now. So the injury happened on a pass play. Kale didn't, Alex went off the field. Like I wasn't there, I guess went off on his own power. They didn't know the severity of it at the time. Talking about Kale talking about himself. It's like, we didn't know at the time. It was, they got, that news later. So just kind of talking about that, kind of what's it like to see your friend get hurt and what does it mean going forward. So, that'll be in tomorrow's paper.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to that. And
What game you covering this week, Barry?
I'm covering Dell City at Claremore, a rematch of last year's 5A semifinals where Dell City beat Claremore. And so Claremore will be looking for some revenge and to try to win the district title, which would be very doable if Claremore can beat Dell City. So it would really, that has been such a wild district. And so it wouldn't assure itself of a district title, but the way anything is possible, the way things have been going in that district this year. Although I will have to say that would be a big upset if Claremore could win, because Dell City is on a run right now of at least 246 consecutive points. They've won their last 4 games, 246-0. And before that, that was following a 61-10 win over Collinsville. So this is going to be a tall task for Claremore, but Claremore is not going to go in scared because they felt they competed really well with Dell City in last year's semifinals. They just got a bit of a hole, might have been a little nervous. They turned the ball over, and so they feel like if they don't turn the ball over and can control the ball on offense, then they've got a shot. Play disciplined football. But it's really interesting. This is Del City's 4th trip across the turnpike. It will be their 4th trip across the turnpike into the Tulsa area this year. So they know the road to the Tulsa Metro very well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll leave it there for this week. Barry, great stuff as always. We appreciate you checking us out. Barry and I will be back next week. We'll talk about week 9 and we'll look ahead to the final week of the regular season. Thanks for joining us.